post-production. That is the final design phase of the movie making process. This is where the movie is finally put together and preferably achieves the organic unity that has been planned for during the whole movie making process. There are many steps in the post-production that have to be taken care of. And one is the color timing or the color grading. And this is where the colors and the hue, saturation and brightness of each shot is carefully adjusted. And when you do it yourself, it is quite convenient to split it up in those three parts: hue, saturation and brightness. If you look at a shot and you see that there is something wrong with it, it is a very good idea to split it up in these three. So the hue is, for example, that it can be a little bit reddish or a little bit greenish or so. The saturation is how much of the color we have in the image. Very saturated or desaturated. And the brightness is of course the brightness of the image. The brightness is actually quite complex because you have you can make the bright parts of the image darker, or you can make the middle part of the image, the medium grays, you can make them brighter or darker. So just a general change in overall brightness might not be sufficient. Very often you need to adjust the different parts of the grayscale separately. And color grading have different purposes. One purpose is basically to make the images look good. Another purpose is to make the images blend together. If you have shot on different time of day or in different locations, but you want it to look as if it is the same space and time, then you might need to adjust the colors of the image so that you feel that they are the same. You can also intentionally use different color grading on different scenes in order to keep them apart. A very obvious example is The Matrix, where all the sequences taking place inside the matrix is a little bit green tinted. Another example is Traffic, where the scenes are taking place in the States are a little bit bluish, while the scenes taking place in Mexico is, of course, a little bit yellowish. It's a typical convention. Mexico is always yellow in movies by some reason. Another part of post-production is computer graphics. And of course, computer graphics have changed the whole visual effect industry completely. Before computer graphics, it was very difficult to achieve even the most simple visual effect. But nowadays you can achieve quite astounding things. Amateurs can do quite a lot with simple tools like After Effects, and the professional movie makers can, as you know, make completely photorealistic images of anything. And CGI stands for computer graphics images. And when you talk about computer graphics, you usually think about 3D graphics. You have a 3D model of a dinosaur or an environment or so. But you have to realize that very often it's a matter of 2D graphics. And it can also be a combination of these. And that is called 2D and a half, where you fake the appearance of three-dimensionality by having two-dimension layers. A typical example is if you have a landscape, a computer-generated landscape, then you might actually divide the landscape into layers. And these layers are two-dimensional, but if you shift them slightly in respect to each other, you can create the illusion of the camera moving through the landscape, for example. That is actually quite that is quite often it's done like that. And this thing with layers that are moving and in different ways interacting with each other, you might recognize that from Photoshop. Photoshop is working very much with layers. And what you're doing in Photoshop is a compositing of images. And in post-production and in visual effects, the compositing is very important, because in compositing, that is where you combine the live action shots with the 3D graphics or the computer graphics. And as we see in this example, you have a clean plate with basically just water, and then there is added these computer graphics battleships. And when you put computer graphics together with photographic images, at the start it looks awful. And you have to massage or marry these layers into each other. And there is all sorts of tricks to make that work, and we will get back to that later. But one thing is, for example, to have a grain across the whole image, so that the computer graphics is very clean and doesn't have any grain to it, while the photographic images have noise or grain in it. So if you put the same noise and grain across the whole image, then you fool the audience that the computer graphics belongs to the photographic image. You blend the images together, and it looks completely realistic if you do it well. Another important part in post-production is, of course, the editing. I would guess that actually that is the most important part, because that is, of course, where you actually tell the story by editing. Audio is important as well. The audio can be sound effects, and sound effects are often called Foley. But audio can, of course, also be the music, which is called the score. Personally, I am not very fond of movie music, actually. I think that very often the music is not necessary. It can be quite nice with a movie that can tell the story without music, and maybe rely more on the sound effects. If you think of a horror movie, imagine or recall how very important the sound effects is in a horror movie. Then we have the voiceover or the narration, which is of course very, very common in documentaries. Sometimes we have voiceover or narrator in a fiction, but it's quite seldom. It's if you think of the genre film noir, that is quite often a voiceover, but otherwise it's quite seldom. Editing is very important, as I said, and there's lots of things to think about when it comes to editing, and it's quite difficult to formalize editing. It's very much a craft that you have to learn, and I wouldn't say that I am very good at it, but I really believe that practice makes skills in this case. The more you practice editing, the better you get, and you really need to look at other movies. How is things done. So I would say that the best way to learn editing is to look at other movies and then do your own movies over and over and over again.